Seeking the power to live forever, history's greatest emperor lifts a cup of mercury and drinks it down. This horrifying moment isn't fiction. It's a real scene from history. Now, we're diving into the most disturbing mysteries behind how leaders have died. Tier 1. The surface. Napoleon Bonaparte's perfect stomach cancer. After his crushing defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, the man who once made all of Europe tremble was exiled to the damp, windswept island of St. Helena. The British were determined to never let him rise again. On this prison-like island, his health was slowly eroded. In the final months of his life, he was tormented by severe abdominal pain and constant nausea and vomiting that made it impossible to eat. His once sturdy frame became skeletal. 6 years later, on May 5th, Napoleon finally took his last breath. He was only 51. His keeper, the British Governor Hudson Lowe, quickly provided an official cause of death. The autopsy report was clear and precise. A massive perforated ulcer in his stomach. The entire organ severely eroded by cancer cells. Yes, stomach cancer. It was a perfect explanation. Clean, simple, and conveniently absolving the British of any suspicion of abuse or murder. After all, his father had also died of stomach cancer. It was a matter of family history, and that's case closed, right? However, Napoleon himself didn't think so. In his will, he left a final accusation from beyond the grave. I die before my time, murdered by the English oligarchy and its hired assassin. The English people will not be long in avenging me. This stunning charge in his will stood in awkward contradiction to the autopsy report of natural death, providing fuel for the conspiracy theories that would rage for generations. For over a century, Napoleon's accusations seemed like nothing more than the powerless fury of a defeated man. That is, until modern science uncovered a clue the British couldn't bury. Researchers obtained a lock of Napoleon's actual hair and tested it with technology that transcended eras. The results shocked the world. His body contained arsenic, extremely high concentrations of it. This discovery hit like a bombshell, giving Napoleon's accusation a vicious new edge. Supporters insisted it was a meticulously planned, years-long chronic poisoning. Was he slowly poisoned by his captors over the years? Or was the killer hiding in his inner circle? Some pointed the finger at the Count of Montalon, his supposed friend, who stayed with him until the very end. Another theory sounds more like a Gothic novel. He was breathing poisoned air every day. The wallpaper in his residence was colored with a fashionable pigment called Scheele's green, which, in the island's damp climate, would have released toxic arsenic gas. But the latest and most chilling theory weaves all these clues together. It suggests that all of the above might be true. Napoleon did have advanced stomach cancer. He was indeed exposed to arsenic over a long period, which weakened his heart. But the final straw came from the very people trying to save him. To treat him, his doctors administered large doses of powerful laxatives. This harsh treatment caused him to lose massive amounts of potassium. For a heart already weakened by arsenic, this was a death sentence. So, did he die of cancer, murder, or medical malpractice? The answer is likely a combination of all three. The British never needed to get their hands dirty. They just had to let the island, the room, and his own doctors do the final work for them. Alexander the Great's deadly cold. In Babylon, 323 BCE, the conqueror who had the world at his feet by age 32, Alexander the Great was running a fever. This was no ordinary illness. It began with fever and chills, then progressed to excruciating abdominal pain. Finally, a strange paralysis crept up his body from his feet, leaving him in a conscious but paralyzed state. He couldn't speak, but until his final moment, the mind that had conquered the world remained terrifyingly lucid. At the absolute peak of his power, he had naturally not yet named a successor. His collapse created a massive power vacuum. His ambitious generals, like sharks smelling blood, were ready to carve up his empire. The cause of his death is as fractured as his empire. Mainstream theories point to natural diseases like typhoid, malaria, or even West Nile virus, but a strange legend points to a more mystical possibility. For a full 6 days after his death, despite the sweltering Babylonian heat, his body showed no signs of decomposition. His followers saw this as a sign of his divinity, with incorruptibility being the ultimate proof. However, the most chilling part is the cold explanation offered by modern medicine. He may have suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, an autoimmune disorder. Patients with this disease are paralyzed, but remain mentally aware. More critically, the disease can cause one's breathing to become so shallow that ancient physicians would have been unable to detect it. Yes, this means he may have been declared dead prematurely, while he was still alive. His body didn't decompose because he wasn't dead yet. Of course, the stench of a betrayal conspiracy still lingers. His generals had long grown weary of endless campaigns and resented his adoption of Persian customs. Toxicologists have offered a compelling theory that Alexander was slowly poisoned with wine, steeped with the plant white hellebore. This toxin can cause a slow, agonizing death, with symptoms that are strikingly consistent with historical accounts. The news of Alexander's death immediately triggered the collapse of his empire. A brutal 40-year civil war known as the Wars of the Diadochi ensued, leading to the murder of his entire family and the permanent fragmentation of his empire. Ultimately, his body was lost to history. Tier 2. Below the surface, the sanctioned murder of Ludwig II. This is a story of political assassination, with an ending as dramatic as a Wagnerian opera. On June 13, 1886, King Ludwig II of Bavaria, known as the Fairy Tale King, was found dead in the shallow waters of Lake Starnberg. Dead alongside him was his psychiatrist. Just the day before, he had been declared mentally incompetent and deposed. Ludwig was a romantic born in the wrong era, pouring all his energy into building fantastical castles like Neuschwanstein. What finally broke him was money. As his debts mounted, his ministers plotted a coup, using insanity as a pretext to depose him. A psychiatric report, prepared without even a personal examination of the king, gave this coup a veneer of medical legitimacy. The official explanation was that Ludwig killed his doctor during a walk, and then drowned himself in the lake. This version barely fits the narrative of a desperate act by a mad king. However, the physical evidence directly contradicts this account. First, Ludwig was an excellent swimmer. The possibility of him drowning in waist-deep water goes against basic survival instincts. Rumor has it the autopsy report showed no water in his lungs, while the doctor's body showed clear signs of a struggle. So, did the doctor beat himself up? The most popular political assassination theory holds that the government, fearing he would escape with the help of supporters and attempt to reclaim the throne, had to eliminate him permanently. Fishermen claim to have heard gunshots near the lake that night, and a banker even testified that he had seen the coat the king wore that day, and it had 2 bullet holes in the back. Yet, soon after, his death quickly transformed him into a legend. The very actions once deemed insane, the castle that drained the treasury, became a massive source of tourist revenue after his death. It not only paid off all his debts, but also became Bavaria's most famous cultural symbol. What one era condemned as madness, a later one praised as visionary creation. Pope John Paul I, the smiling pope who died in his sleep. The Vatican, September 28, 1978. Pope John Paul I, known as the Smiling Pope, was found dead in his bedroom just 33 days after his election. He inherited a Vatican deeply mired in financial scandals, involving the mafia and an illicit Masonic lodge. There is significant evidence that the new pope was appalled by this corruption and was planning a complete purge of the Vatican Bank. And so, just as he was about to shake up a vast and shadowy network of interests, he died. The Vatican's official announcement stated that the Pope passed away peacefully in his sleep from a heart attack, and, citing canon law that forbids autopsies on popes, refused any request for an examination. This is entirely understandable and aligns with the standard reaction of an authoritative institution facing a crisis, because its word is law. But this official story was riddled with holes and contradictions. They initially lied, claiming a papal secretary found the body, only to admit later it was a nun. They claimed he was in poor health, but his personal physician insisted the Pope was in excellent condition. It was this lack of transparency and self-contradictory narrative that provided the most fertile ground for conspiracy theories to flourish. The leading alternative theory points directly to murder. His reform plans threatened powerful vested interests within the Vatican. If he had succeeded, a massive financial empire would have collapsed. Assassination theorists speculate the Pope may have been given an undetectable poison, such as an overdose of digitalis, which can induce an arrhythmia with symptoms similar to a heart attack. Whatever the truth, the Vatican's handling of the crisis was an unmitigated disaster. It became a classic case study of how the opaque and contradictory actions of a closed institution can permanently damage its own credibility and allow conspiracy theories to run rampant. Dag Hammarskjöld, the fallen dove of peace. In the early hours of September 18, 1961, a plane approaching the airport in Ndola, Zambia, fell like a meteor into the dark African jungle. On board was the sitting UN Secretary-General, Dag Hammarskjöld. He was on a mission to mediate the bloody crisis engulfing the newly independent Congo. At the time, the Congo was a proxy battleground for the United States and the Soviet Union. Hammarskjöld's UN peacekeeping mission, aimed at preserving Congolese unity, put him in conflict with nearly every major power. He had become a stumbling block, an idealist standing in the way of immense interests. The initial investigation, led by colonial authorities, concluded with the absurd finding of pilot error, a simple, convenient conclusion that wouldn't cause trouble for anyone. But a growing body of evidence pointed to a much darker truth. This was not an accident, but a political assassination. Multiple local eyewitnesses claimed there was more than one plane in the sky that night, and that they saw Hammarskjöld's plane on fire before it crashed. The sole survivor, before dying, spoke haltingly of an explosion before the crash. Even more stunningly, declassified NSA documents and testimony from former intelligence officers revealed an intercepted communication in which a pilot calmly described the attack. "I see a transport plane coming low. Yes, it is the DC-6. I'm going to make a run on it. I've hit it." The list of suspects is long, all pointing to powers whose interests were threatened by Hammarskjöld's peace initiatives. Western intelligence agencies, mercenary pilots, and even a secret organization from South Africa's apartheid government. In recent years, a renewed UN investigation concluded that an external attack or threat may have been a cause of the crash, and noted that key intelligence files related to the crash remain classified by countries like the United States and the United Kingdom. This is no longer a simple plane crash, but a complex political assassination case set against the backdrop of the Cold War, involving great power rivalries, colonial interests, and intelligence agencies. Tier 3, the deep waters. Buried here are some of the more bizarre and absurd death mysteries, whose manner of death was almost theatrical and humiliating. If you are fascinated by these secrets hidden in the cracks of history, please hit the subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from and what questions you have. That way, you won't miss a single story, and it's a huge motivation for me to keep this channel running. Now, let's dive deeper. Attila the Hun and the wedding night nosebleed. Attila, the man known as the Scourge of God, whose name struck fear into both the Eastern and Western Roman empires. However, this conqueror's end came not on a blood-soaked battlefield, but in an almost comical fashion on a wedding night filled with alcohol and hormones. In the year 453, Attila was celebrating his marriage to a beautiful new bride named Ildiko. After a night of heavy drinking and celebration, he retired to the bridal chamber. The next morning, however, guards found him dead, with no wounds on his body and the new bride weeping by his side. The sole historical account claims that while lying on his back in a drunken state, Attila suffered a severe nosebleed. The blood flowed down his throat, ultimately causing him to choke to death. A great conqueror, killed not by the sword, but by his own nosebleed. This ending is so difficult to accept. One might even call it humiliating. Murder theories inevitably arose, with some blaming the bride and others suggesting the nosebleed was just the official cover story for a political assassination. However, modern medicine provides a concrete explanation for this seemingly bizarre death. It's proposed that long-term alcoholism can lead to esophageal varices, which can easily rupture during a state of drunkenness, causing massive bleeding that would appear very similar to a severe nosebleed. The stark contrast between Attila's epic life and his comical death is immense. It's for this reason that some would rather believe it was a perfect murder. King William II of England, the hunting murder. On August 2nd, 1100, King William II of England was struck in the chest by an arrow and killed instantly while out hunting. This is considered a textbook example of the perfect medieval murder. William II was a deeply unpopular tyrant. At the time, his older brother was abroad, while his shrewd and ambitious younger brother Henry just so happened to be in the very same hunting party. Just when things seemed hopelessly confused, a single witness suddenly emerged. The sole witness claimed that he had been aiming for a stag, but the arrow ricocheted off a tree and accidentally struck the king. But a string of circumstantial evidence forms a powerful, close loop of logic, pointing to a meticulously planned murder. First, the nobleman who accidentally killed the king immediately fled to France on horseback and never returned. Second, upon hearing the news of his brother's death, Henry's first reaction was not grief, but to race at full speed to seize control of the royal treasury. Just 3 days later, Henry was crowned King Henry I of England at Westminster Abbey, completely ignoring his older brother's claim to the throne and the dead king. Interestingly, the entire process was as smooth as if it had been rehearsed, and after his accession, King Henry I never pursued any form of justice against the man who killed the king. This incident, using a dangerous aristocratic pastime as a cover, allowed a murder to be easily disguised as an accident and profoundly changed the subsequent history of the Norman dynasty. After going for a swim on December 17, 1967, Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt disappeared without a trace. Even after one of the largest search and rescue operations in the country's history, nothing was ever recovered, leaving his fate a complete mystery. The most widely accepted official explanation is accidental drowning. The sea conditions that day were extremely rough, and that particular beach was notorious for its dangerous rip currents and powerful waves. It is believed Holt overestimated his swimming abilities and was ultimately consumed by the sea. But for a national leader to disappear so completely in such an ordinary way left a huge space for conspiracy theories to grow. The most dramatic theory claimed that Holt was actually a spy who defected by boarding a waiting submarine. This claim caused a huge sensation at the time, but was soon refuted by multiple sources due to a complete lack of evidence. Harold Holt's grandson publicly stated that the waters in that area were too shallow for a submarine to get close, and joked that his grandfather didn't even like Chinese food. Furthermore, there is absolutely no evidence to suggest Holt had any improper connections with China. Tiervier, the Dark Abyss, Edward V. In the summer of 1483, the 12-year-old King Edward V and his 9-year-old brother were playing in the Tower of London. Then, they vanished, as if erased from history. Their fate became one of the most famous and chilling cold cases in English history. Their father had just died, and the young Edward V inherited the throne. Their ambitious uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had the two young princes placed in the Tower of London under the pretext of protection. At that time, the tower was both a royal palace and a formidable fortress. While the princes were initially seen playing in the gardens, they were spotted less and less as the summer went on, eventually disappearing from public view entirely. The young king's absence left the throne empty, paving the way for their uncle to be crowned King Richard III. The disappearance of the two princes immediately sparked rumors of their murder. Later, Tudor dynasty historians described in detail how Richard III ordered a trusted associate to smother them with pillows in the middle of the night. This version was later popularized by Shakespeare's play, which forever nailed Richard III to the pillory of history. In 1674, workers discovered a wooden box containing the skeletons of two small children under a staircase in the Tower of London, which were widely believed to be those of the missing princes. However, to this day, the British royal family has refused to authorize DNA testing on these remains. Thus, the mystery that has loomed over the Tower of London for more than 5 centuries remains unsolved. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China's quest for immortality. Obsessed with seeking immortality, China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang died suddenly in 210 BCE, his death ironically caused by his long-term consumption of so-called immortality elixirs, laden with toxic mercury. But the truly disturbing part of Qin Shi Huang's death is what happened afterward. It was a textbook palace coup centered around a rapidly decaying corpse. The chancellor, Li Si, and the eunuch Zhao Gao, who were accompanying the emperor, decided to conceal his death in order to install the emperor's youngest son, Hu Hai, on the throne. It was the middle of summer, and to mask the growing stench of the decomposing body, Zhao Gao ordered that carts loaded with salted fish be added to the emperor's procession. And so, a convoy carrying a rotting corpse and carts full of salted fish continued its journey, pretending the emperor was still alive in front of all the civil and military officials. During this grand deception, centered on a corpse, Zhao Gao and Li Si forged an imperial edict, ordering the emperor's eldest son, Fu Su, who was stationed at the frontier, to commit suicide. Only then did they announce Qin Shi Huang's death and declare Hu Hai the new heir. This dramatic coup was a direct catalyst for the swift collapse of China's Qin dynasty. Qin Shi Huang sought eternity his entire life, never imagining that the first thing to happen after he died would be his own corpse, being used as a central prop in a massive political fraud, and that the eternal empire he built would, just like his own body, rapidly decay and crumble. George Plantagenet, drowned in a barrel of wine. This final story might be the most bizarre and darkly humorous execution legend in the history of the British royal family. On February 18, 1478, George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence, was secretly executed in the Tower of London. He was the brother of King Edward IV, an ambitious, volatile, and extremely jealous man. Finally, when he challenged his brother's authority one too many times, the king's patience ran out and he was sentenced to death. According to a widely circulated legend, George was granted the privilege of choosing his own method of death. As a notorious drunkard, he chose to be drowned in a large butt of his favorite Malmsey wine. The truth of this legend has always been debated, with most scholars believing it to be merely a satirical political tale. But considering George's royal status, the king might have preferred a private, bloodless execution, and drowning would have fit that requirement perfectly. True or not, the story perfectly captures the volatile and dramatic personality of the Duke of Clarence. In an extreme way, it combines the cruelty of power with absurd personal indulgence. History is never a textbook filled with standard answers, but a vast and ancient crime scene. The official records are often just the victor's narrative. Our exploration ends here for today. If you are also fascinated by digging up these buried secrets, be sure to click subscribe and turn on the little bell next to it so you don't miss the signal for our next departure. Now, I want to hear your thoughts. Of all the cases we discussed today, which one did you find the most chilling? Do you think Napoleon's death was a conspiracy or an accident? Or do you know of other, similarly bizarre mysteries surrounding the deaths of leaders? Write your theories and insights in the comments section below, and let's continue to seek the truth together in the deep sea of history.